We are up in the bird's nest here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I'm Brendan Mortensen alongside Annie Claff. Our studio looks a little bit different today, a little bit upgraded. We've got a new fancy logo designed by Annie. We've got a new horrifying bobblehead that looks like Annie.
Yeah.
Vaguely.
Well, we've added some pizzazz. I felt like we
pizzazz is a good word for it.
Color. How cute is it that there's baseballs in a bird's nest? But you are right about the bobblehead. It's actually pretty terrifying. It's been stowed away in my closet for 5 years.
Give us some backstory here about the bobblehead.
5 or 6 years now. My dad gave it to me as a gift after my senior year soccer season at high school. And she was a little dusty, but thought, hey, what better use for her than
front and center
on the podcast?
Yeah.
The most valuable player, obviously.
Right. Annie gets the vote for most valuable bobblehead alongside the vote for most valuable Oriole. The hair is kind of freaking me out a little bit. You probably don't have a great view of it from here. I wish we had a camera just solely focused on the bobblehead, but the hair is somehow like levitating back from your bot. Like gravity does not make sense in your bobblehead's universe.
It looks like a helmet.
It does a little bit. A very weirdly shaped, long
But I look like the quarterback here of this team. This looks great.
You are. You are the captain of the Orioles bobbleheads. You've been appointed.
Captain
Congratulations.
Of the Bird's Nest podcast.
There you go. That is your new title. That is your new role.
Thank you.
The record will reflect it.
I'm very proud of her.
Annie, I wanted to go, every time I'm on this podcast, I say I can't wait for next week when we don't have to talk about an injury. And then I try to knock on wood and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Our last 4 podcasts, I was scrolling through just looking at the titles. The last 2 weeks, I've just gotten angry at how many injuries there have been and just refused to title the podcast something about an injury. But our last 4 podcasts have been talking about Jordan Westberg's injury, Grayson Rodriguez's injury, Zach Eflin's injury, and then Ryan Mountcastle's injury. And gosh darn it, we've got more injuries to talk about today. So as I did last week, I will ask you once again this week, would you like to start with some good injury news or the bad injury news?
Let's get the bad ones out of the way.
Okay.
Let's just...
All right. Last week you went with the good.
She can handle it.
Okay. I hope so. I don't know. We'll start with the bad. The first not good injury update is that we don't have any updates on Ryan Mountcastle, which isn't not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
We just haven't really gotten any positive injury updates on Ryan Mountcastle. Wouldn't call that awesome. Not necessarily going to call it bad. So that's how I start off the bad injury updates. And then we've got Jorge Mateo, who got UCL reconstruction surgery on his left elbow. Remember when the injury happened, it was just a nasty, nasty looking injury. And he gets that UCL reconstruction, which is essentially Tommy John, I think, but it's on his non-throwing elbow, so I'm not sure exactly what that process looks like in terms of the rehab with your non-throwing elbow compared to your throwing elbow. Brandon Hyde saying that the Orioles are hopeful that Mateo will be back by next regular season, so it is obviously still going to be a lengthy rehab process, regardless of whether or not it's his throwing elbow or non-throwing elbow. Kind of based on what we heard from Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias and the general kind of lack of news we heard about any sort of Jorge Mateo progression, we kind of assumed that he was going to be out for the year. It didn't seem like he was in any sorts of conversations down the line in terms of guys that they were getting back in September. But Jorge Mateo now confirmed to be out for the season, hopeful that he's back for the start of next year. Obviously, a tough blow for Mateo, a tough blow for the Orioles, as I think if you looked at a potential spot for Mateo in September, October, it would have made a lot of sense for him to platoon at second base with Jackson Holliday against left-handed pitching. He was hitting lefties great this year, so unfortunate to see Mateo out, but hoping for a speedy recovery for him.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Ryan Mountcastle injury, how there's not really any news on that. I mean, the only positive to that is for the next 6 games that the Orioles face, not including this last White Sox game, but the next 2 series, luckily the Orioles are supposed to be facing all right-handed pitchers. So in that sense, it's nice to have Ryan O'Hearn, incredible leader in the clubhouse, and we've seen kind of He's getting talked to a lot recently in the clubhouse by media members and kind of just always getting his opinion on things as of late. But so definitely a leader and also someone that you are happy that you have at first base to kind of hold that position for Ryan Mountcastle. And it's lucky given his left-handed hitting to be going up against those next 6 right-handed pitchers rather. So that is a little bit of kind of a plus side in that sense. But you're right. It is definitely kind of same old at this point with more injuries and 2 more guys that we definitely probably didn't expect. And one of them being a very, very sad Ramón reminder.
You wanted to start with the bad news, so we have to start with our Ramón reminder. We had been having fun on this podcast, giving you our Ramón reminder, us victory lapping a little bit because of how well Ramón Urías had been playing in the absence of Jordan Westberg. There were a lot of calls early in the season to not have Ramón Urías on this team anymore, and I don't know where the Orioles would have been in the month of August if it were not for Ramón Urías. So we had been giving you our Ramón reminders of how good he had been over the last week since the last time we had talked to him. And this time, it is a sad Ramón reminder.
It is so sad. I mean, he was hitting .319 with 4 home runs, 15 RBIs since August 15th and an above 1,000 OPS since in that time frame. Those were very happy Ramón reminders over the last few weeks. A very happy note in the second half of the season in an offense that was struggling, very slow, especially with some of the guys that you had hoped to lead the pack, like Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman. And Ramón Urías was a very great surprise to kind of lead that front. He was definitely hot and heating up in the beginning of the second half. So this is really unfortunate. Sprained ankle, I believe it is. So don't know what that time frame is. I think he's only on the 10-day.
Yeah, he's on the 10-day injury list with a sprained ankle. Brandon Hyde kind of said, like, I don't know, it's a sprained ankle. Like, that's one of those injuries where it can really last just however long it lasts. Like, this could be 2 to 4 weeks. This could be 6 weeks. Like, you never really know with a sprained ankle. And it just felt so indicative of the bad injury luck that the Orioles have had because it was just on a routine play. When you first saw the play, you thought maybe somebody slid into him, something like that. No, he was just covering third base and just rolled his ankle off the side of the base. It was a play that Ramón Urías has probably made 1,000 times in games, in practices, and just unfortunate timing because, as you mentioned, he had been fantastic over this last stretch. Jordan Westberg goes down on July 31st, and in the month of August, Ramón Urías had a .260, .337, .521 slash line with an .858 OPS. Over the last 4 series, he had a home run in 4 consecutive series. He was hitting .300 with an OPS over 1,000. And as a team, the Orioles, we know, really struggled at the plate in August. As a team, they had a .692 OPS. Ramón Urías was at an .858. You mentioned Ryan O'Hearn, being very vocal and things like that. O'Hearn, in a post-game interview with Melanie Newman, said, like, put some respect on Ramón Urías' name. He's kind of been carrying us lately.
Yeah.
That's how important he had been in this lineup. And obviously you don't want to see Jordan Westberg go down, but you couldn't have asked for anything more from Ramón Urías at the plate. He was essentially putting up Jordan Westberg type of numbers in August, which I don't think anybody expected. I mean, when Jordan Westberg goes down on July 31st, he has an .815 OPS on the season. Ramón Urías, as I mentioned, an .858 OPS in August. So he was putting up Jordan Westberg type of numbers in Westberg's absence, and it's just really unfortunate that this was a guy who got his opportunity, made the most of it, and now he goes down with injury.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to lose such an impactful player like Jordan Westberg, an all-star, you better hope that you have someone like Ramón Urías to be able to fill those shoes, and the Orioles got lucky to be able to have that depth. And they were incredibly lucky to get those types of numbers from Urías. But you also mentioned kind of routine play injuries because there's been a lot of those this season. And it's not just your, overuse. There have been, sure, elbow inflammation, shoulder inflammation in terms of pitching injuries, but there have been a lot of injuries that are kind of like freak accidents.
Yeah.
This routine play, terrible rolled ankle off the base, Jorge Mateo colliding with Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg getting hit, Heston Kjerstad getting hit in the head.
Yeah.
There's just been a lot of those kind of unfortunate injuries that you can't really do anything to avoid. And I mean, even with Dean Kramer too, that's a pretty nasty contusion.
Yeah.
Getting hit in the forearm off of a bat, and kind of just something you can't really do anything about.
Yeah, I put Dean Kramer in the good injury update side of things.
True.
Obviously, the Dean Kramer injury is unfortunate because you just look at another starting pitcher getting hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was James McCann who said after the game in an article that Rakabaka wrote on MASNsports.com, he pretty much said, you go from being surprised to just like, here we go again.
I know, yeah.
And so Dean Kramer, in his last start, takes 103 off the forearm on his right arm.
That was the scariest. Like
that was a
contusion,
scary injury. Yeah.
The bruise, I've never seen a bruise that big happen that quickly.
Yeah, that thing ballooned in the span of about 5 seconds.
That was the size of an orange.
Yeah, in the time that we saw Dean Kramer get hit to head athletic trainer Brian Ebel walk out to the mound, like his forearm was already...
It looked like a monster was living on his forearm.
Yeah, it was like an alien Romulus,
Yes.
like something was coming out of his arm.
It was nasty.
It was bad. And so for Dean Kramer to have been throwing yesterday, to have avoided the injured list thus far, for the X-rays to be negative, listen, given what the Orioles have had to go through this year with starting pitching injuries, I'm putting Dean Kramer, hopefully only just missing one start, on the good side of things. He's still working to make this start and to not miss any.
Yeah.
Brandon Hyde said yesterday, he knows the guys around him really appreciate how hard he is pushing, how much he is working to get back and not even miss a single start after taking 103 off the arm.
Yeah.
So I'm going to count some lucky stars
It's a
there.
bionic arm right there.
Pretty much. Yeah, I'm going to count some lucky stars that Dean Kramer, hopefully, listen, if Dean Kramer misses one start, okay, that's fine after taking 103 off the forearm. If he misses more than that, obviously that creeps into the bad news thing. But Dean Kramer, as of right now, looks to be okay.
Yeah. And that also kind of begs the question of who is going to fill his shoes for the next start, which would be tomorrow. I mean, you have Cole Irvin, who only had 3 innings in his last outing, and the bullpen is pretty rested after this White Sox series, so you could use that depth to have a bullpen game tomorrow. But then I've also seen kind of the conversation of, is Brandon Young going to come up or bring someone up from the minor leagues, which I think would be fun to see Brandon Young. I mean, he's doing really well right now, so I think that could be an interesting option. But you're right. I think Dean Kramer is going to be the type of guy that doesn't even try to miss this next start. Obviously, I don't think that that's in the cards, but...
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. He was throwing yesterday with a wrap on his arm. The Orioles aren't going to push him, so if he's not 100% ready to go for his start tomorrow, then I wouldn't anticipate seeing him on the mound.
Yeah.
My best guess would be a Cole Irvin bullpen type of game. If you do call somebody up like Brandon Young, that would have to be a roster move on the active roster, and you don't really want to put Dean Kramer on the injured list if you don't have to. I believe if you put Dean Kramer on the 10-day injured list retroactive to when the injury happened, he would have to miss 2 starts. So I would be surprised if the Orioles made a roster move, like calling up Brandon Young to make a spot start. I also could be wrong, and maybe you could just rearrange the rotation a little bit where Kramer could still make his second start if he is on the 10-day injured list. So maybe Young would be an option at that point. I would just be surprised if they made a roster move, especially because you have somebody like Cole Irvin, who even in a bullpen type of game, he could give you at least 4 innings.
Yeah. And there also has been lots of pitching strengths recently. I mean, I know you are coming off of 2 series that should be must-win series, but I mean, Albert Suarez has been doing phenomenally. We know that ever since, especially the Kyle Bradish injury and then the Grayson Rodriguez injury. I mean, he's coming off 7 innings, 2 earned runs against the Rockies. Corbin Burnes finally is coming back a little bit from a kind of short rut, but about 3 starts, kind of rough starts, but then a rough first inning against the White Sox, but then really came back after that, scoreless after the first inning. So he kind of really needed that quality start to kind of get back into people's good graces. Happy to have Zach Eflin back, of course, 7 innings, 9 strikeouts against the Rockies in his first game back. And then, of course, Cade Povich, incredible game for him last night, 7+ innings and 10 strikeouts, which is the most from an Orioles rookie since Kyle Bradish in 2022. So that was huge to have him have that start last night.
Yeah, it wasn't the dominant Corbin Burnes against Chicago that we have seen at the beginning of the season, but it was definitely better. Corbin Burnes, you mentioned the tough first inning, but there were 2 balls hit off Burnes that I think were 68 and 69 miles an hour off the bat, and they just fell into the right spots. Like, okay, what are you going to do about that? He gave up some hard contact to Gavin Sheets in that game. That was pretty much the only hard contact that he gave up in that game. So it wasn't a completely dominant Corbin Burnes, but he was getting back to what worked for him at the beginning of the season, which was throwing the cutter a little bit softer, focusing on the placement more rather than trying to get it up to, 97, 98. He was throwing it more 93, 94. So it seems like he is getting back to where he wants to be. He also started throwing the sweeper against the White Sox, which is something that he did at the end of last year too. So he's getting the sweeper back into the rotation a little bit. It's just kind of a curve slider variation that, he can work a little bit differently, different pitch grips and different shapes. So I'm not concerned about Corbin Burnes. I know there has been some interesting conversations about where you would like to have him in your playoff rotation. He's starting game 1 of a playoff series.
Yeah.
It's Corbin Burnes. It's Corbin Burnes. Anyway, we've got some more good injury updates to go through here. Danny Coulombe faced hitters for the first time yesterday. This is his first time since getting surgery in June to remove bone chips from his elbow. That's encouraging. We have seen Danny Coulombe throw off a mound, but this is the first time that he threw against actual hitters. He is going to have rehab assignments. He's been out for a long time. This is a good step in the progression to getting Danny Coulombe on an actual rehab assignment. Coulombe, obviously, I think is up with Jordan Westberg in terms of the importance of getting somebody back on this team. He is an unbelievable veteran presence in the clubhouse. He is like one of the nicest guys that you will meet in baseball, and he's also just really good at pitching.
Yeah.
So getting Danny Coulombe back at the back end of the bullpen is going to be massive in September. This is a really good step towards him getting closer to a rehab assignment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're right when you say that Westberg and Coulombe are kind of like on the same tier of importance of guys that are already on the injured list coming back, because I think you're right. I mean, he's arguably, if not already, the best reliever in this Orioles bullpen.
Yeah,
so
certainly up there.
To get him back would be that very important shift at a mid-September trade deadline that the Orioles are going to be expecting in the middle of the month. So having him back, along with kind of Sir Anthony Dominguez, who has a lot of postseason experience in his past, will be huge. Craig Kimbrell, obviously, postseason experience, and he's been a little bit rocky, but is kind of coming back out of that slump as well. So seeing a lot of positive notes, both individually for all these players, in terms of starting rotation and bullpen members. So. But also collectively.
Yeah, and it just gives you another reliable left-handed reliever. Cionel Perez has been awesome. Gregory Soto, by the way, his last 8-9 outings have been scoreless.
Yeah.
I know Soto got off to a slow start after the trade deadline, but this is why you're patient with guys that you just get in the building, because Gregory Soto has shown you why the Orioles moved for him at the deadline. It is a live arm, and he has been fantastic recently. So adding Danny Coulombe to that equation with a couple of high-leverage lefties at the end of the bullpen is great. Sir Anthony Dominguez, Yennier Cano as your high-leverage right-handed relievers down the stretch as well. I think you feel pretty good about that. And another guy you could potentially have in that conversation too is Jacob Webb, who tossed an inning for Norfolk over the weekend. We saw him here the past few days. Going back to Norfolk today, pitching an inning again tonight. And the Orioles will, I think, reportedly decide after this outing whether he's good to go or not. But whether it's this outing or he needs one more in AAA Norfolk, good signs for Jacob Webb. He said he is feeling good physically. You're not really going to look at the results in terms of what Jacob Webb does in Norfolk. The inning that he pitched over the weekend was scoreless. That's great. But regardless of what he does tonight, I mean, as long as he feels good, that's the important thing for Jacob Webb moving forward.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot over the last few weeks about kind of that September push and the change of scenery with all these players coming back from the injured list. And we're starting to see it. It's coming to fruition now, where we have Zach Eflin back and Danny Coulombe is making progress, and Jacob Webb is kind of that next step in. I mean, Jordan Westberg was already getting some catches in. So
yeah,
definitely, and no cast officially, so that's great news too. So definitely some happy updates in Birdland.
Yeah, Jordan Westberg, the other big one as well, was out on the field during warm-ups yesterday and just kind of looked over and I was like, is that Jordan Westberg playing catch without a cast on? And it was. So Jordan Westberg playing catch without a cast for the first time yesterday. Put the cast back on to take grounders. Jordan Westberg, by the way, I know Brandon Hyde always talks about it. I have been here in the warehouse like pretty early before games, and I want to say this is now the 4th or 5th time that I have looked out the window and there are 2 guys on the field, and it's Jordan Westberg and a trainer. That's it. Jordan Westberg just here earlier than everybody else with a cast on his hand for a while, but he is just like, he's doing speed drills. Yesterday, I know he played catch, but he's also taking like hard grounders at third base and then just like popping up and mimicking throws. Like, the dude is just obsessed with baseball.
Yeah.
And he is obsessed with like getting back and getting in the lineup and being ready to play. And I'm sure Jordan Westberg will probably go on a rehab assignment because he has been out a while. And no matter what you're doing with drills and things like that, it's hard to simulate any live batting or anything like that. So I would imagine he will be on a rehab assignment. But there is nobody that you can look at and say that they are working harder to get back from injury than Jordan Westberg. I mean, the dude is out there every day. He is going to be ready to come off the injured list whenever his hand is healed up enough for him to play. Like, he is pushing. That dude is just ball player.
Yeah.
Jordan Westberg,
ball
man.
Player. I would say Westberg is the one player I would put 100% faith in to be back 100% physically after an injury. Like, there would be a bunch of guys who would come back kind of be slower than they were before, but I think that stamina-wise and physicality, I think Jordan Westberg is going to make sure that he's at peak level performance. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to get the strength back into a hand after being in a cast for so long, and that's obviously what he's going to be working on now and what he has been doing the last few weeks. But I think he's one of those guys, you're right, who you would put a lot of faith in and not be worried to be back at peak performance by the time they're done with their injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is working so incredibly hard to get back, and he is doing every drill that he possibly can with one hand. So that's just the kind of guy and the kind of baseball player that Jordan Westberg is, and we are hopeful to get him back soon. But kind of the bigger picture that we wanted to talk about today as well is, yes, there have been a ton of injuries, but the Orioles have done more than stay afloat, because as we are talking on this fine Wednesday morning, the Orioles are on top of the American League. They have the best record in the AL East. They are a half game up on the Yankees. And for as much as we have talked about these injuries and, the slumps that certain guys have had here and there, this is the best team in the American League record-wise right now. They are, if the season ended today, the Orioles would have the number 1 seed in the American League. And I know it doesn't feel that way sometimes, given the amount of injuries, given the slumps that some of, the bigger name guys have gone through recently. But they are not only treading water, they are still succeeding to the point where they are here. And I know that this is kind of a weird season where there's nobody really running away with things. And I'm not going to sit here and say the Orioles have played their best baseball over the last 2 months. The record would tell you that they haven't. Mm-hmm. But they have played well enough to still position themselves here, to be at the top of the American League. There's not going to be a team in the American League, more than likely, that finishes with 100 wins. There's not going to be many teams around baseball if any team around baseball that finishes with 100 wins, unless somebody goes on an unbelievable run in September. So, yeah, there's not one dominant team running away, and you would have loved for that to be the Orioles. But with all of these injuries, guys have stepped up. And let's start with some of the infielders that we probably wouldn't have seen this much. It obviously starts with Ramón Urías. Mm-hmm. With Jordan Westberg's injury, he had been awesome in the month of August. We talked about him already. At second base, I think Jackson Holliday would have overtaken Jorge Mateo at some point for that everyday second baseman job. But I think we would have seen Mateo platoon against left-handed pitching a lot. We probably wouldn't have seen Jackson Holliday in the lineup as much against left-handed pitching. And when you're trying to win as many baseball games as possible in September in Jackson Holliday's rookie season, I don't know if the plan would have been to start him against lefties all the time, but it is kind of nice to just be able to throw him into the fire a little bit, because Jackson Holliday, if everything goes according to plan, is going to be an everyday player for his big league career against right-handed pitching, against left-handed pitching, whatever it may be. He's just there earlier than expected, which could benefit him down the line.
Yeah, and Jackson Holliday, you and I had talked about months ago how there probably wasn't a place for him in the lineup unless there was an injury to a Jordan Westberg, a Jorge Mateo, a Ramón Urías. And unfortunately for Jorge Mateo, but luckily for Jackson Holliday, he got that shot and he was able to prove himself, which he did very well with flying colors. I mean, his first major league home run was a movie, and just kind of being able to prove yourself after the first major league stint that he had, not that many at-bats, but then coming back in the big leagues and really showing off why he deserves to be here. And he's been someone that the Orioles are lucky to have had, kind of similar to with Jordan Westberg getting injured and then having Ramón Urías to be there to fill those shoes. You're lucky to have Jackson Holliday to fill those shoes for Jorge Mateo because things have worked out very well. I mean, he's still obviously getting his feet wet in the big leagues, but kid's still only 20 years old.
Yeah, and, you know, as I mentioned, I think he would have gotten a lot of at-bats anyway. I think even if there weren't injuries to Ramón Urías and Jorge Mateo, like, he's going to be in the lineup, but he's in the lineup every day, which is a situation I don't know would have happened if it weren't for these injuries. And now the Ramón Urías injury in the infield has opened the door for Coby Mayo, who is not getting everyday reps because of another guy who is here and getting at-bats when we didn't think he was going to, in Emmanuel Rivera. All of a sudden, that's your third base tandem where Coby Mayo, I know he's not starting every day. I know many people would like to see him get more reps, but you're going to pick and choose your spots with Coby Mayo. This is still a rookie. You're still in the thick of an AL East race. Emmanuel Rivera is playing really well right now. He's got an .833 OPS in 8 games, kind of single-handedly won one of those games in Colorado. He had a triple against the White Sox the other day. Like, he's playing well enough, and you're just kind of riding the hot hand at third base right now. Coby Mayo, I think, will probably get some more opportunities against left-handed pitching. We could see him at first base as well. We're seeing Rivera at third base and first base too. But it's valuable for Coby Mayo regardless of whether or not he is starting every day. He is in the big leagues in September in the middle of a division push. Mm-hmm. And that's an important thing for Coby Mayo to be a part of in this clubhouse, regardless of whether or not he is starting every day. You're going to be careful with Coby Mayo. You're going to pick and choose your spots, but it's still valuable for him to be here and to be getting this experience, especially when you have somebody like Emmanuel Rivera, who was claimed off waivers from the Marlins. We didn't really make anything of it. I don't think we even talked about it when the Orioles made that claim because it was just like, well, okay, he's probably a depth guy, but Emmanuel Rivera is just playing well enough to be in the lineup every day, and neither of those guys, Coby Mayo or Emmanuel Rivera, would be here with a healthy Jordan Westberg or a healthy Ramón Urías.
Yeah, and I think Emmanuel Rivera is one of those guys that we kind of didn't make much about because he's not the only one. I mean, I think there were even people at the trade deadline where we were like, okay, this is a depth push and someone you can get to kind of fill the back and be able to be a replacement, but we didn't necessarily think that they were going to be everyday players, and we've seen some of those guys like Austin Slater be a huge impact, Eloy Jimenez at designated hitter. those are two guys that I didn't necessarily expect a whole lot from, and we're seeing a lot from them right now. Austin Slater coming off of a huge game against the White Sox he went 3 for 4 with 1 double, 3
against
RBIs.
Right-handed pitching.
Yeah.
By the way, yeah.
1 walk. So he has been huge, not only in the leadoff spot against left-handed pitchers, but like you mentioned, against right-handed pitchers, kind of a pleasant surprise there as well. And he was one of those guys, like I said, that we didn't really expect a lot from, especially when you're talking about, you already got a right-handed hitter out of Eloy Jimenez. Where's Slater going to fit in? So I think that those two guys have also been incredibly huge to kind of lead the charge offensively as of late.
Yeah, because there's really not many right-handed bats that have been able to stay healthy. There's no Jordan Westberg, no Ramón Urías, no Ryan Mountcastle, no Jorge Mateo. Those were 4 of your most important right-handed hitters. And on our live trade deadline show, we talked about the Eloy Jimenez deal, but we talked about it as in like hey, this is a high upside move for somebody who can hopefully mash against left-handed pitching. And Eloy has done that. He's hitting close to 300, but he's been in the lineup against left-handed pitching and right-handed pitching just because the Orioles have needed a good bat in the lineup. And Eloy has been a good bat thus far. Austin Slater on this trade deadline show, I think we may have mentioned it in passing, or we just didn't really mention it at all because it was a move for Austin Slater and Livan Soto for cash considerations. And Austin Slater this season had a 301 OPS in Cincinnati, a 574 OPS in San Francisco. And he's got an 836 OPS in Baltimore with an on-base percentage over 400. He has mashed against left-handed pitching. And as you mentioned, in that game against the White Sox the other day, he goes 3 for 4 against right-handed pitching. Yeah. So Austin Slater has been, I think, way more than either of us expected, probably more than the Orioles expected as well. They have gotten the most out of his bats. Brandon Hyde has just said, the dude's a pro. I mean, Austin Slater has said, too, he credits the hitting coaches a lot with his success at the plate and being able to bounce back this season. He's a good defender. We saw an amazing play to end the game last night. So Austin Slater probably would not be getting this much run if you had guys like Ryan Mountcastle and Jordan Westberg in the lineup as right-handed hitters. And then in the outfield as well, if you had a healthy Heston Kjerstad, who would probably be your 4th outfielder, he would certainly be getting the reps against right-handed pitching that Slater would not. But Slater has filled in really, really well against left-handed pitching, and I don't anticipate that role changing at all.
I think you hear a lot also when players are traded to the Orioles, like we saw with Zach Eflin. He said, you hear a lot about the Orioles locker room, and it all comes true. They're an incredible group of guys. They all really want to work hard. And I think a lot of why players like Austin Slater, Emmanuel Rivera, Eloy Jimenez are doing so well is because the Baltimore atmosphere kind of just welcomes them and really pushes them to do great things, and not also, like you mentioned, the hitting coaches, everything all coming together. I mean, Eloy Jimenez likely just needed a change of scenery from the White Sox, and then he came to a complete opposite type of scenery in Baltimore. And I think that all of those 3 guys kind of just needed a chance at a better environment and a place where they can be pushed to be their best potential, or to the best potential, and they've all done that.
Yeah, I mean, Eloy Jimenez, we heard him talk about it when the White Sox came to town, but it's it has to be discouraging to play on the worst team in the history of baseball. I mean, we've kind of seen it the last few days. Eloy Jimenez goes from, he said, even when we were winning games, it felt like we were losing because you knew the winning wasn't really going to last. And now he's on the team with the best record in the American League. Yeah, that's going to be helpful for a guy to be able to push himself a little bit more. And, he's got leaders in the clubhouse, guys like Anthony Santander, who struggled to stay healthy in his career, much like Eloy Jimenez had. And Eloy has basically said Santander's kind of turned into his big brother on the team, where he's basically just following him around, doing everything that he does, trying to keep up with, the fitness, nutrition, all these different things that Santander has done to stay healthy and be productive. Eloy Jimenez could really benefit from all of those things. So you're right. The change of scenery has been huge for those guys. obviously, we know about the starting pitching injuries. We have talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast, unfortunately. But Kyle Bradish, Tyler Wells, John Means, Dean Kramer, Grayson Rodriguez have all been down for significant stretches this year. And without that, we wouldn't have seen Albert Suarez.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have seen Cade Povich. We'll start with Povich because he was outstanding last night, and I think that's indicative of what he can do. Obviously, he was facing the White Sox, which is an added benefit. You look good against the White Sox, but he goes 7 1/3, 5 hits, no walks, 10 Ks, no earned runs. When Cade Povich is throwing strike one, he is really good. Yeah. And he has showcased the upside that he has this season. And I do think whether these injuries happened or not, we would have seen Cade Povich for a start or 2 or 3. I think Chase McDermott, a similar scenario where we would have seen them here or there, because even if there weren't, 5, 6 significant injuries in the starting rotation, there were always going to be 2 or 3. You were never going to get through a season with 5 starting pitchers or even 7 starting pitchers. You usually need 8 to 10. So I think we would have seen Povich and McDermott at some point anyway. We wouldn't have seen Povich to this extent. And through this extent, we have seen the ups and downs, which is when he's not throwing the ball in the strike zone, he's walking a lot of guys, he is not effective. But we have gotten a big enough sample size of Cade Povich to see that, when he's throwing strike one, when the ball is in the strike zone, when his command is on point for a game, it's really good stuff. And he can live in the zone and still get guys out. Yeah,
and the command last night, I mean, even putting up the number of 10 strikeouts to be compared to Kyle Bradish as a rookie is huge. I mean, that's really kind of brings you a lot of hope for Cade Povich. And I know you mentioned that it is the White Sox, but this is the same White Sox team that beat the Yankees 12-2 in Game 1.
Yeah, and the strike zone's the same.
Exactly.
You can walk White Sox batters as easily as you can walk anybody else.
Yeah. But I just think that that's a really important sign and takeaway from his start last night. If you're getting compared to Kyle Bradish and the numbers speak for themselves, that's a huge thing to take away. But I also, before we move fully into pitching, I think that those outfielders and infielder replacements and designated hitter in Jimenez, Rivera, Slater have been huge to bring in runs, not necessarily home runs, because we've had the conversation of, are the Orioles, they're certainly a home run heavy team, but they're not necessarily home run reliant. I think that the last two series, the White Sox and the Rockies has shown that, because, I mean, in last night's 9-0 win, none of them were home runs. And yes, that is the White Sox, but same kind of thing goes. The Yankees lost to them 12-2. So it's scoring is just as important, and the strike zone is the same. Yeah,
it was a lot of doubles yesterday, and that's the kind of approach that guys like Austin Slater and Eloy Jimenez bring. Eloy hit his first home run in Colorado. Austin Slater is not going to be a big home run hitter. But you're right, they're going to have good approaches. They're going to look for doubles power, and there are a lot of hitters in this Orioles lineup that probably have been too home run reliant. And we are seeing slumps where they're not necessarily hitting doubles, that's what you need to do when the weather cools down in September and October and the ball's not flying as far. It's valuable to have guys like Austin Slater, like Eloy Jimenez, that are just getting on base. They're putting balls in play. Like, Austin Slater is going to take a lot of walks. Eloy Jimenez is going to put the ball in play a lot. Hopefully he doesn't put it on the ground as much as he did before. He's trying to get the ball elevated a little bit more, but he's trying to get it elevated for doubles rather than for home runs. Yeah. So, no, that's a good point. Those guys bring kind of a different approach than we have seen from the Orioles over the past few months. Last pitcher I want to talk about that we wouldn't have seen is maybe the most important one of this season, and that's Albert Suarez. 27 games, 19 starts, a 3.14 ERA, which is the best ERA in the Orioles starting rotation.
Who would have thought?
He is narrowly beating out Corbin Burns in that category, but it still is. I mean, Albert Suarez, I don't know where this team is without Albert Suarez. He has been fantastic in the starting rotation. He has been great out of the bullpen. I think you can make a case that if you were looking at a 4-man starting rotation, it feels like for weeks we had talked about, you've got a 3-man starting rotation in the playoffs with Corbin Burns, Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez. Those are the guys that you need to be healthy. If you're in a 7-game series and somebody needs to start game 4, I think I feel fine about Albert Suarez at this point. Was talking with Drew French about Suarez yesterday, And, it's interesting because Suarez doesn't really have overwhelming stuff. If you look at his StatCast page, he's not blowing anybody away. But French kind of said, yeah, he's got a really easy, really smooth delivery. And he kind of lulls hitters to sleep a little bit because it's a slow delivery. And then he just pumps like 96, 97 by you without a lot of effort. And my favorite anecdote from talking to French about Suarez, I asked him, like, when Suarez came in the offseason, it was a low-profile move. The Orioles obviously were not anticipating needing Suarez to be as important as he has been this year. But I asked, pitching coach Drew French, I said, hey, was there a moment in the offseason when you knew Albert Suarez, could be a guy that can contribute? And Suarez in spring training had a start against the Phillies where the Phillies, had their A lineup out there. And he was getting guys out like Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, Bryce Harper. And that was a moment when a lot of fans were like, whoa, Albert Suarez. But Drew French said he was on the phone with Brandon Hyde after the game. And Hyde told him that Kyle Schwarber had called Brandon Hyde and went, who the heck is Albert Suarez? And Drew French was like, okay, yeah, he might be a dude. And then he was.
He is the dude.
Yeah.
No, he is definitely someone that has flown under the radar this season, but has been an unsung hero. I mean, he's come up clutch in huge moments. Grayson Rodriguez saying he doesn't feel right. All right, Albert Suarez 5 minutes later just pulls out one of his best starts of the season. And then you're looking at him now, 7 innings. I mean, yes, it's against the Rockies, but that's a really hard ballpark to pitch at. And only 2 earned runs in that outing. So he is definitely a guy, I think you're right, that you would feel happy to have him as the 4th man in the rotation. But you kind of can't lose with Suarez in the postseason. You'd be great. You'd be so happy to see him in the rotation, but also he'd be lights out in the bullpen as well. So he can kind of go both ways. And that versatility is going to be huge for this pitching that has been hit and hit by injuries all season long. Yeah,
it's a 1.97 ERA in August. I think when you get to the playoffs, I would be fine with handing Albert Suarez the ball for Game 4. Yeah. If he continues this run in September, I know Suarez has had some stretches this year where he was in the starting rotation and it was like, okay, he lost it for a little bit. He's back in the bullpen. You're really fine either way. Yeah. I think Suarez, as of right now, given the track record from him this season, I would be fine with seeing him Game 4.
Suarez and Ramón and Urías are my 2 MVPs of the season.
Yeah, and I think they kind of should be at this point. Obviously, Gunnar Henderson, Anthony Santander, those are the stars, and they are doing things that stars do. But you need guys like Ramón Urías and Albert Suarez to just step up when other guys go down, and the Orioles haven't missed too much of a beat. Mentioned Urías' numbers have competed with Westberg's numbers in his absence. Yeah. Albert Suarez's numbers have looked as good as anybody in the starting rotation. So you need those types of guys as you get into October. Real quick, Annie, wanted to take a look at the remaining schedule because we are getting to the point where you can look at magic numbers. You can start doing math, right? Brandon Hyde said, he's paying attention to what other teams are doing. He's not really crunching numbers yet. We're not at that point right now. But as we currently stand, the Orioles have the best record in the American League, and they are a half game up of the Yankees in the American League East, as the Yankees had a walk-off grand slam go against them yesterday as Clay Holmes blew another game. So the Orioles are currently up in the division. They've got one more game against the White Sox here tonight to wrap things up. And then you've got the Rays, Red Sox, Tigers twice, and Giants before you get to late September. It's a lot of winnable games, I think, where the Orioles would be able to gain some ground. I know we're talking about the last 2 series where it's like, well, yeah, you're supposed to beat the Rockies and you're supposed to beat the White Sox. Okay, so do it. It took 2 of 3 against Colorado. Good. Hopefully they take 3 of 3 against the White Sox. Yes, that is what good teams should do against teams like the Rockies and White Sox, but that's also what you need to do as the pressure gets amped up in September. It's baseball. Anybody can win a game at any given time. So you need to take care of those games. Then you end the season with the Yankees and Twins. And those are going to be 2 really tough series, but those could be series that determine whether or not the Orioles win this division.
And those could be 2 series where you have Grayson Rodriguez back. You maybe, hopefully, have Danny Coulomb back, Jordan Westberg. Those are huge 3 players that you would hope to have back by then, and 2 huge series that you would obviously want them back.
Yeah.
And that could be, the Yankees series could very well decide the division winner. So, I mean, you also take a look at the Yankees rest of the season. The O's series is probably their hardest one. After that, it's definitely the Royals. But they have Cubs, Royals, Red Sox, Seattle Mariners, A's, Orioles, and then Pirates. I mean, A's and Pirates should be their 2 easy wins. I mean, Cubs, Red Sox, Mariners, similar position at the middle of the standings in all of baseball. But the Royals is their toughest test, aside from the Orioles, whereas the Orioles' toughest test is probably going to be the Twins, aside from the Yankees. So it's a similar position, but those are 2 teams that are going to really have to work hard. Yes, they're must-win series moving down the stretch, but sometimes those are the hardest ones to win.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Yankees' next few series here. I mean, like the Cubs are still fighting for a playoff spot.
Sure.
I mean, they're 4.5 games out of a wild card spot, so it seems unlikely, but like you never know. In September, the Royals are, I think, currently the 3rd team in the American League wildcard standings, so they are trying to hold on to that position as well. So they have a few tough series coming up. The Red Sox, I know, have fallen off a little bit, but like the Red Sox are still the Red Sox, and it's still a Yankees-Red Sox series. The Mariners have some of the best pitching in baseball. The A's have very under the radar been one of the better teams in baseball in the second half of the season. Like, they're not an awesome team, but they have still played good baseball here in the second half. So I don't think it's an easy schedule for the Yankees down the stretch by any means. The Orioles are up in the wild card stand. If you wanted to look at it like that, they're a half game up in the American League East. They've got a pretty significant gap in the wild card standings as well. The Yankees right now are 5.5 games up on the Royals for that 3rd wild card spot, which means the Orioles would be 6 games up on that. The Red Sox are 4.5 games behind the Royals. So the Orioles are essentially 10.5 games up on a playoff spot. So barring something catastrophic, the Orioles are looking good for a playoff spot. Obviously, you would like for that to be the division champs, and you would like for that seed to be as high as possible, or maybe you don't. Maybe you can have your own opinions on whether or not you want to be the wild card team and get some momentum or have the bye, whatever. The Orioles are in good shape. And I think with the schedule in September, they have a good chance to gain some ground.
Yeah, needless to say, Rays series is going to be huge. Need to win that. Red Sox, Tigers, twice, Giants. Yeah. And then Yankees, Twins. Those are going to be the 2 big ones. And these 4 or 5 series leading up to that are going to be huge to get wins under the belt before you get key contributors back from the injured list.
Yeah, the Tigers, I will say, 2 series against the Tigers, they have very sneaky been one of the best teams in baseball in the second half. They're only 4.5 games out of a wild card spot. They are up over 500, so don't discount those 2 series against the Tigers. But we'll see, and we'll see what contributors are able to come back here over the coming weeks in September. Hopefully next week we can talk about some more good injury updates. Because my goodness, I would like to go just one singular podcast without talking about a new injury. It hasn't come true.
Fingers crossed that it's just that they're coming back from the injured list.
That would be such a lovely injury update, because we have now gone 4 podcasts in a row talking about a new injury, and I sure would like to stop at any point. So
maybe my bobblehead is good luck.
Maybe the bobblehead is good luck, or maybe it'll haunt the warehouse.
It's pretty terrifying.
There's really no telling. But we'll see. We'll see
scary.
if we're still back in this room next week, or if Annie's bobblehead has, I don't know, created some sort of like demon that keeps us out of the room. It's hard to say exactly what will happen here, but thank you so much for tuning in to this week's edition of The Bird's Nest. Thank you for following along with us live on YouTube and Facebook. We are live every Wednesday at 11 a.m., or you can catch us after the fact on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts or your digital shows. You can find us here on The Bird's Nest. Big thank you to Amy Jennings behind the scenes for producing this one. For Annie Claff, I am Brendan Mortensen, and we'll catch you next time.